In this video, I'm going to make some small grotjets, including flight stands. I saw this cool little grotjet on Reddit, see the link below. It was kitbashed, mostly from the Stormboyz kit. I wanted to have a go at it myself, but using cheaper materials. As it happens, I have that particular grot head, which is a measurable fraction of my current plastic kits, so I use that as the base for the size. I cut a piece of paper straw, this is 10mm in diameter, to 2.5cm long, doing it as straight as possible, but orcs if it wasn't. I measure a rectangle on the top, using the grot head for size, 5mm wide and 9mm long, and approximately 5mm from one end, and cut it out with a craft knife. If you can make an enclosed cockpit, you can omit this and any need for a head. I measured the smaller distance to the end, and cut a strip of paper slightly under that. I then glued the end of the strip to a piece of bamboo skewer and wrapped it around, gluing every now and then, using another strip until thick enough to just fit. Once done, I glued it in place. This is glued in place. I'm covering the end in card using an 8mm hole punch piece of card to glue there. 10mm proved to be a bit too large. 8 is technically a bit small, but it's easier than doing it manually. For the front, I'm making a cone for mostly inside the nose. I need a circle for this. The cone's measurements are 8mm diameter at the base and 6mm high. From that, I can then calculate the length of the slant, and double that for the circle diameter, which is 14mm. I cut a circle that size, then cutting to the centre and cutting a pie piece out, in this case about a third of the circle. I move it around until it's the right size, and glue it together. I make a similar paper roll for the front like the one at the back, this time 5mm wide. This is glued in place. Then the cone is glued in front of that. I cut strips of this thin card 8mm wide and 14mm long. These are stuck onto the outside of the straw, and I deliberately leave gaps to make them look like panels. I cut away excess around the opening. I then cut a 5mm strip and wrap it around the front. For the wings, I'm using graphics medium chipboard, cut into two triangles 10mm by 15mm, created by cutting a square that size and then cutting it in half. After gluing these on, I glue a smaller triangle or other shape of chipboard underneath. This adds strength to the join. In this case, I'm cutting two triangles from a 10 by 5mm piece. I'm making two missiles by cutting two lengths of cocktail stick 24mm long, keeping the point. Then cutting four 7 by 5mm triangles and gluing these onto the tail. For the guns, I'm using this plastic tube which I think came from mechanical pencil, but you can use anything suitable, or drill holes in the end of skewers and cocktail sticks as I did with the Gatling guns. For the first Grotjet, I used guns clipped from cheap army men. I'm blocking off an end by pushing a cocktail stick in, cutting off the excess, and then pushing the rest in. I'm taking this larger plastic tube, which came from a spray bottle and has been sanded, and cutting off a small piece. Using some thick packaging cardboard, I cut a strip 8mm high and then cut three rectangles 4mm wide. These were then cut into 3 dags. Using some thin packaging card, I cut 2 more, approximately 4mm wide by 6mm high. I kept these small soy sauce bottle lids, thinking that they would make a good small engine, and that's what I'm using it for. I first give it a sand, then superglue it to the back. I'm mounting the guns by the side of the nose, I superglue the sliver in front of the cockpit as a targeting reticule. And glue the missiles under the wings. I stick on the two thinner dags, one on each wing. Then the three larger ones spaced around the nose. I punch out some 1mm discs from the thin packaging card and glue these on at the edges of the panels and on the dags as rivets. This is now ready for painting. I paint the plastic with this primer. And I give the rest a couple of coats of 50/50 Mod Podge and black paint to strengthen it. I follow the same painting method as I've used in my other Orc vehicles, stippling on 2 coats of burnt umber. Then I light to one of burnt sienna. Then dry brushing it with gunmetal grey metallic. I paint some of the panels green. This is a cheap acrylic paint, as are most of them, so several coats are needed for them all. Some other parts are painted blue. Then the nose cone and the tips of the missiles are painted red. And I paint some of the tail fins on the missiles white. I give the dags undercoats of white because I'm painting them yellow. Then paint a checker pattern on those parts with black. The dags are then painted yellow. The rivets on the dags are painted with gunmetal grey metallic. Everything is then dry brushed with silver metallic. The end of the engine is stippled with burnt sienna. This and the next colours are intended to mimic heat damage. Purple is then blended in. And blue at the end. I dilute some black ink and go around the edges of the rivets and the panels with it. Finally, I superglue a magnet inside. This will be used to attach it to the stand, as well as to mount it on other things if I want. I'm using a stand from another already finished Grotjet to make sure the magnet has the correct orientation. Now to make one of those flying stands. I'm using 32mm circular bases, which means these can be used as stormboyz proxies. The stand itself is made from 1.5mm armature wire, mostly because I had some. I cut a piece 9cm long. The magnet is another 2x2mm one, like the one in the Grotjet itself. First, I cut a strip of paper 5mm wide. This is wrapped around the armature wire and glued together with wood glue, so that the entire end is approximately 2mm wide, like the magnet. This won't keep it in place, so once set, I add some superglue to the end of the wire and slide the paper roll over it so it's flush. This is much easier than trying to glue and wrap it to the wire. Once set, I superglue the magnet to the end, checking it's the right way. Then cut a 7mm strip of paper and wrap some around both wire and magnet. I then get some heat shrink tubing wide enough to go over the end with the magnet. I then cut a piece a bit longer than the end, slide it over and shrink it. I remove any writing from the heat shrink tubing with isopropyl alcohol. Given that isopropyl is flammable and I'm using flame, I give it a bit for the alcohol to evaporate before using any more. I use 2 more pieces of thinner tubing over the rest of the wire and shrink that too. I drill a hole in the base. I feed the wire through and superglue it down, using some baking soda to strengthen the bond. Then use some of this loose weight from a damaged ankle weight superglued to the bottom for stability. For the top, I'm just gluing on a few limestone chippings, yet more of those for my dry stone walls. Then surrounding them with loose coarse sand superglued in place. Dripping some diluted PVA and washing up liquid to lock that in place. There are other ways of making flying stands, I just happen to have all the bits I used. Once I have more grot heads and paints to do them, I can add them to the grotjets like this. Here are some more grotjets I made, all at least somewhat different. The first used two guns that were clipped from army men as weapons. The rest with guns use the plastic tubes. This one has a bottom. This was made with a short piece of paper straw filled with paper in the same way as the body, with a 6mm cardboard disc glued to each end. This was then wrapped in thin card. The front is a hemispherical nail bead. The rear is a couple of 3mm cardboard discs glued together, with a couple of 6mm ones glued over those. Want to help support the channel? Then please like, comment, subscribe, share, join our Patreon, or buying through the Amazon or drive-through links below helps support the channel at no cost to you.